Welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading a story, and then we're going to be... Hello, welcome to Heavy Storytelling. Today we are going to be reading a story, but first we are going to be doing daily devotions with Daniel, and then we are going to be doing the synopsis with... Skip the synopsis for now. Then we are going to be reading the Bible with my dad, and then we are going to be doing the synopsis with Kimberly, and then we are going to be doing the two towers, as you can see right here. I don't think you can read this language.
That's just Tolkien symbol.
That's JRR.
But it's right here. No, it's upside down. I know it's backwards, but it's guys, it's backwards. But here is my brother to actually. I'm going to be doing a joke after him. But so I hope you enjoy Daily Devotions with Daniel. Here's Daniel.
Okie day. Hello, who's watching?
Me.
Okay, Mom's watching, just like always.
Me, I'm watching.
Okay. We are gonna be doing one of the previous ones because we didn't do them for a while. June 25th, candy for breakfast. Ask and you will receive, that your joy may be full. John 16:24. Have you ever wondered why children never hesitate to ask for anything? They have the audacity to ask if they can eat candy for breakfast. Buy a toy every time they're in a store, and stay up past bedtime on a school night. And on a more practical level, they ask for something to drink when they are thirsty, help with their homework when they are struggling, and new shoes for gym class. The reason they come to their parents so freely is that they're dependent upon them, and they understand without asking they won't receive. Well, it's different for me because I have money, and my mom and dad like me to pay for everything that I want. Okay.
Not exactly true.
Not true, Daniel.
God's purpose in instructing us to ask Him for anything is to remind us to be dependent upon Him and give Him the glory when He provides for us. So often we rob Him from the glory and ourselves of joy when we become self-sufficient. The Bible clearly states that we do not have because we do not ask. James 4:2. Whenever we have a need, let us try going to the Lord first. We should ask without hesitation, keep our motives in check, and expect God to provide. Emphasis on need, not want.
No, even our wants.
Sometimes our wants. He is your shepherd and has charged himself with the care and keeping of you. For with such a shepherd, how could it be possible for you ever to want any good thing? Hannah Whitwell Smith.
Hello. I am going to remember his words next time that he wants a glass of water from the refrigerator. He can buy it from us now, since he has money. Alright, I think JJ really wants to tell a joke. I don't have any idea what it is, but here is JJ.
Hi. Hi. There's my dog.
Tell the joke.
That's going to be the person that I'm telling the joke to. So, this is a classic. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Interrupting chicken.
Interrupting chicken. I don't get it. All right. No, I get it. No. Really, I get it. Okay.
Okay, that's enough.
So now I have to get the camera to.
2 Samuel chapter 5.
Yeah, we're on. Okay, we got it. All right. So now we're on 2 Samuel chapter 5. It's possible that Samuel had chickens. I don't know for sure. All right. Were chickens authorized in ancient Israel? No, they weren't. Oh,
Unclean. Were they
Kimmy knows for sure. They were unclean.
I'll
No,
give that chicken
no
back.
chickens allowed, and no pork.
No chicken, no pork? That's like,
Yeah, that is so un-American.
Are they
How dare they?
guys,
All right.
Charlotte Pod.
okay, sit down.
I have to.
Okay, so 2 Samuel chapter 5, we've pretty much confirmed that Samuel didn't have chickens, but by 2 Samuel chapter 5, Samuel wasn't alive anymore anyway, so it is rather irrelevant. Let me begin. This is the English Standard Version. Daniel, where is your Bible?
Right here.
That's not it. That's a women's study Bible.
Can you put your foot down?
Hey, Kim, where's your Bible?
All right, ready?
Kim, where's it?
Let me begin. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Abron and said, Behold, we are your bone and flesh. In times past, when Saul was king over us, it was you who led us and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to you, You shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Abron, and King David made a covenant with them at Abron before the Lord. And they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Abron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and at Jerusalem he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, You will not come in here, but the blind and the lame will ward you off, thinking David cannot come in here. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is, the city of David. And David said on that day, Whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind, who are hated by David's soul. Therefore it is said, The blind and the lame shall not come into the house. And David lived in the stronghold and called it the city of David. And David built the city all around from the Millo inward. And David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David and cedar trees, also carpenters and masons, who built David a house. And David knew that the Lord has established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. And David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he came from Abron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. And these are the names of those who were born to him in Jerusalem: Shemua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphelet. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, and all the Philistines went up to search for David, but David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim, and David inquired of the Lord, Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, Go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand. And David came to Baal Perazim, And David defeated them there, and he said, "The Lord has broken through my enemies before me like a breaking flood." Therefore the name of that place is called Baal Perazim. And the Philistines left their idols there, and David and his men carried them away. And the Philistines came up yet again and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, "You shall not go up, go around to their rear and come against them opposite the balsam trees. And when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then rouse yourself, for the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines." And David did as the Lord commanded him, and struck down the Philistines from Geba to Gezer. And that is the end of chapter 5. And one thing I would like to point out, because David was made ruler over Israel, it said when he was 30 years old, which is also the age of Joseph when he came into power in Egypt. So he was 17 when he got to Egypt, and he was 30 when he came to power. So in those 13 years, he was slave in Potiphar's household and eventually became imprisoned and then rose to power. All right, so we are on chapter 9. Last time we read chapter 8, which is the road to Isengard, in which a posse of men on horseback rode into Isengard, which is the stronghold of Saruman, and they noticed that Saruman was standing on top of the roof with his staff in his hand, and he was casting spells on the Ents, and they were falling. And then there was some sort of they were talking about going to, let's see, I'm trying to remember. There was something really good that I wanted to remember. Oh, right. And then when they got there, Gandalf saw Saruman, and he said, "Hey, Saruman the White," and he said, "Hey, Gandalf the White." And then they had the Wizards of the White Party, and they that was a lot of fun. Don't you remember the Wizards of the White Party?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's
What
Kimberly.
about Merry and Pippin?
Here's Kimberly to say how it really happened.
What happened to Merry and Pippin, Dad? In this alternate reality of yours.
They died.
Yeah, it's not a dad synopsis without someone dying, apparently.
About someone's.
I'm joking, by the way. So, what actually happened was, it turns out the Ints, they had already attacked, and they had defeated them. And Merry and Pippin, they were like on guard duty, waiting for everybody to get there. And they were supposed to bring a message to the king and to Gandalf saying, "Hey, Treebeard's waiting for you over in this place." And they did tell them that eventually. And the king kind of, he's like, "Hey, I'd like to listen to you talk about your ancestry. That's gonna last forever." So, hopefully we don't get a very detailed description of like 100 years of ancestry from Merry and Pippin.
Yeah,
And-
Gandalf warned him.
Yeah.
Said, we need to stop this right here. We just don't have time.
Yeah.
I mean, we're already 564 pages in to this story, and we need to get on with it after all.
He didn't do all the fourth wall breaking, but yeah, pretty much. Then, let's see. I think they're right about to go and talk to Treebeard. So let's pick it up where we left off and read what's going on. Here's Dad.
Nice job, Kim.
And And I forgot to mention that I actually did something today. Haha. I downloaded and uploaded the last 7 videos of Fellowship of the Ring, finally, to YouTube. So they are on YouTube. Maybe I'll post a link in the comments, but you can find them on YouTube, Heavy D Storytelling. Just look at the Tolkien playlist, and I think there's like somewhere close to 50 videos on it now. And I've got 7 videos for the 2 towers to post either tomorrow or sometime later this week. Of course, it'll be 8, including this one. I just got a little behind, and now I'm catching up. All right, so now we're on Chapter 9, Flotsam and Jetsam. Gandalf and the king's company rode away, turning eastward to make the circuit of the ruined walls of Isengard, but Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas remained behind. Leaving Arod and Hussafell to stray in search of grass, they came and sat beside the hobbits. "Well, well, the hunt is over, and we meet again at last, where none of us has ever thought to come," said Aragorn. And now that the great ones have gone to discuss high matters," said Legolas, "the hunters can perhaps learn the answers to their own small riddles. We tracked you as far as the forest, but there are still many things that I should like to know the truth of." "And there is a great deal, too, that we want to know about you," said Merry. "We have learnt a few things through Treebeard the Old Ent, but that is not nearly enough." "All in good time," said Legolas. "We were the hunters, and you should give an account of yourselves to us first." "Or second," said Gimli. "It would go better after a meal. I have a sore head, and it is past midday. You truants might make amends by finding us some of the plunder that you spoke of. Food and drink would pay off some of my score against you." "Then you shall have it," said Pippin. "Will you have it here, or in more comfort in what's left of Saruman's guardhouse, over there under the arch? We had to picnic out here so as to keep an eye on the road." "Less than an eye," said Gimli, "but I will not go into any orc house, nor touch orcs' meat or anything that they have mauled." "We wouldn't ask you to," said Merry. We have had enough of orcs ourselves to last a lifetime, but there are many other folk in Isengard. Saruman kept enough wisdom not to trust his orcs. He had men to guard his gates, some of his most faithful servants, I suppose. Anyway, they were favored and got good provisions." "And pipeweed?" asked Gimli. "No, I don't think so," Merry laughed. "But that is another story which can wait until after lunch." "Well, let us go and have lunch then," said the dwarf. The hobbits led the way, and they passed under the arch and came to a wide door upon the left, at the top of the stair. It opened direct into a large chamber with other small doors at the far end, and a hearth and a chimney at one side. The chamber was hewn out of the stone, and it must have once been dark, for its windows looked out only into the tunnel. But light came in now through the broken roof. On the hearth wood was burning. "I lit a bit of fire," said Pippin. "It cheered us up in the fogs. There were few logs about them, and most of the wood we could find was wet. But there is a great draught in the chimney. It seems to wind away up through the rock, and fortunately it has not been blocked. A fire is handy. I will make you some toast. The bread is 3 or 4 days old, I am afraid." Aragorn and his companions sat themselves down at one end of the long table, and the hobbits disappeared through one of the inner doors. "Storeroom in there, and above the floods, luckily," said Pippin, as they came back laden with dishes, bowls, cups, knives, and food of various sorts. "And you need not turn up your nose at the provision—" "Oh, sorry, I saw Gimli, so—" "And you need not turn up your nose at the provender, Master Gimli," said Merry. "This is not orc stuff, but man food, as Treebeard calls it. Will you have wine or beer? There's a barrel inside there, very passable, and this is first-rate salted pork. Or I can cut you some some rashers of bacon and broil them if you like. I am sorry there is no green stuff. The deliveries have been rather interrupted in the last few days. I cannot offer you anything to follow but butter and honey for your bread. Are you content?" "Indeed, yes," said Gimli. "The score is much reduced." The three were soon busy with their meal, and the two hobbits, unabashed, set to a second time. "We must keep our guests company," they said. It's funny that all this that they had to go through to follow the hobbits, and the dwarf is saying that it's caused a rift of contention. Maybe he's being a little bit pretentious on that rift, but one meal and he's like, "The score is much reduced." Like, wow, okay, it's good to know. "You are full of courtesy this morning," laughed Legolas, "but maybe if we had not arrived you would already have been keeping one another company again." "Maybe, and why not?" said Pippin. "We had foul fare with the orcs, and little enough for days before that. It seems a long while since we could eat to heart's content." "It does not seem to have done you any harm," said Aragorn. "Indeed, you look in the bloom of health." "Aye, you do indeed," said Gimli, looking up and down over the top of his cup. "Why, your hair is twice as thick and curly as when we parted, and I would swear that you have both grown somewhat, if that is possible for hobbits of your age. The tree beard, at any rate, has not starved you." "He has not," said Merry, "but Ents only drink, and drink is not enough for content. Treebeard's draughts may be nourishing, but one feels the need of something solid, and even Lembas is none the worse for a change." "You have drunk the waters of the Ents, have you?" said Legolas. "Ah, then I think it is likely that Gimli's eyes do not deceive him. Strange songs have been sung of the draughts of Fangorn." "Many strange tales have been told about that land," said Aragorn. "I have never entered it. Come, tell me more about it, and about the Ents." "Ents?" said Pippin. Ents are all different for one thing, but their eyes are very odd." He tried a few fumbling words that trailed off into silence. "Oh, well," he went on, "you have seen at some at a distance already. They saw you at any rate, and reported that you were on the way, and you will see many others, I expect, before you leave here. You must form your own ideas." Now, said Gimli, "we're beginning the story in the middle. I should like a tale in the right order, starting with that strange day when our fellowship was broken." "You shall have it if there is time," said Merry. "But first, if you have finished eating, you shall fill your pipes and light up, and then for a little while we can pretend that we are all back safe at Bree again, or in Rivendell." He produced a small leather bag full of tobacco. "We have heaps of it," he said, "and you can all pack as much as you wish when we go. We did some salvage work this morning, Pippin and I. There are lots of things floating about. It was Pippin who found 2 small barrels washed up out of some cellar or storehouse, I suppose. When we opened them, we found they were filled with this, as fine a pipeweed as you could wish for, and quite unspoilt." Gimli took some and rubbed it in his palms and sniffed it. "It feels good, and it smells good," he said. "It is good," said Merry. "My dear Gimli, it is Longbottom Leaf. There were the hornblower brand marks on the barrels, as plain as plain. How it came here I can't imagine, for Saruman's private use, I fancy. I never knew it went so far abroad, but it comes in handy now." "It would," said Gimli, "if I had a pipe to go with it. Alas, I lost mine in Moria, or before. Is there no pipe in all your plunder?" "No, I am afraid not," said Merry. "We have not found any, not even here in the guard-rooms. Saruman kept this dainty to himself, it seems, and I don't think it would be any use knocking on the doors of Orthanc to beg a pipe of him. We shall have to share pipes, my good friends, as good friends must at a pinch." "Half a moment," said Pippin. Putting his hand inside the breast of his jacket, he pulled out a soft wallet on a string. "I keep a treasure or two near my skin, as precious as rings to me. Here's one, my old wooden pipe." And here's another, an unused one. I have carried it a long way, though I don't know why. I never really expected to find any pipeweed on the journey, but then my own ran out. Or when my own ran out. But now it comes in useful after all." He held up a small pipe with a wide, flattened bowl and handed it to Gimli. "Does that settle the score between us?" he said. "Settle it," said Gimli. "Most noble hobbit, it leaves me deep in your debt." "Well, I am going back into the open air to see what the wind and sky are doing," said Legolas. "We will come with you," said Aragorn. They went out and seated themselves upon the piled stones before the gateway. They could see far down into the valley now. The mists were lifting and floating away upon the breeze. "Now let us take our ease here for a little," said Aragorn. "We will sit on the edge of ruin and talk, as Gandalf says, while he is busy elsewhere. I feel a weariness such as I have seldom felt before." He wrapped his grey cloak about him, hiding his mail shirt, and stretched out his long legs. Then he lay back and sent from his lips a thin stream of smoke. "Look," said Pippin, "Strider the Ranger has come back." "He has never been away," said Aragorn. "I am Strider and Dunedain too, and I belong to both Gondor and the North." They smoked in silence for a while, and the sun shone on them, slanting into the valley from among white clouds high in the west. Legolas lay still, looking up at the sun and sky with steady eyes and singing softly to himself. At last he sat up. "Come now," he said. "Time wears on, and the mists are blowing away, or would if you strange folk did not wreathe yourselves in smoke. What of the tale?" "Well, my tale begins with waking up in the dark and finding myself all struggling in an orc camp," said Pippin. "Let me see, what is today?" "The 5th of March in Shire reckoning," said Aragorn. Pippin made some calculations on his fingers. "Only 9 days ago," he said. "It seems a year since we were caught. Well, though half of it was like a bad dream, I reckon that 3 very horrible days followed. Mary will correct me if I forget anything important. I am not going into details. The whips and the filth and stench and all that. It does not bear remembering." With that he plunged into an account of Boromir's last fight and the orc match from Emin to the forest. The others nodded as the various points were fitted in with their guesses. "Here are some treasures that you let fall," said Aragorn. "You will be glad to have them back." He loosened his belt from under his cloak and took from it the 2 sheathed knives. "Well," said Merry, "I never expected to see those again. I marked a few orcs with mine, but Ugluk took them from us. How he glared! At first I thought he was going to stab me, but he threw the things away as if they burned him." "And here is also your brooch, Pippin," said Aragorn. "I have kept it safe, for it is a very precious thing." "I know," said Pippin. "It was a wrench to let it go, but what else could I do?" "Nothing else," said Aragorn. "One who cannot cast away a treasure at need is in fetters. You did rightly." The cutting of the bands of your wrists, that was smart work," said Gimli. "Luck served you there, but you seized your chance with both hands, one might say." "And set us a pretty riddle," said Legolas. "I wondered if you had grown wings." "Unfortunately not," said Pippin. "But you did not know about Grishnach." He shuddered and said no more, leaving Merry to tell of those last horrible moments, the pawing hands, the hot breath, and the dreadful strength of Grishnach's hairy arms. "All this about the orcs of Barad-dûr, Lugberts as they call it, makes me uneasy," said Aragorn. "The Dark Lord already knew too much, and his servants also, and Grishnach evidently sent some message across the river after the quarrel. The Red Eye will be looking towards Isengard, but Saruman, at any rate, is in a cleft stick of his own cutting." "Yes, whichever side wins, his outlook is poor," said Merry. "Things began to go all wrong for him from the moment his orcs set foot in Rohan." "We caught a glimpse of the old villain, or so Gandalf hints," said Gimli, "on the edge of the forest." "When was that?" asked Pippin. 5 nights ago, said Aragorn. Let me see, said Merry. 5 nights ago. Now we come to a part of the story you know nothing about. We met Treebeard that morning after the battle, and that night we were at Welling Hall, one of his ent houses. The next morning we went to Entmoot, a gathering of Ents, that is, and the queerest thing I have ever seen in my life. It lasted all that day and the next, and we spent the nights with the Ent called Quickbeam, and then in the afternoon, in the 3rd day of that moot, the Ents suddenly blew up. It was amazing. The forest had felt as tense as if a thunderstorm was brewing inside it. Then all at once it exploded. I wish you could have heard their song as they marched. If Saruman had heard it, he would be 100 miles away by now, even if he had to run on his own legs, said Pippin. Though Isengard be strong and hard, as cold as stone and bare as bone, we go to war, to hew the stone and break the door. There was very much more. A great deal of the song had no words, and was like a music of horns and drums. It was very exciting, but I thought it was only marching music and no more, just a song, until I got here. I know better now. We came down over the last ridge into Non-Curanir after night had fallen, Merry continued. It was then that I first had the feeling that the forest itself was moving behind us. I thought I was dreaming an Entish dream, but Pippin had noticed it too. We were both frightened, but we did not find out more about it until later. It was the Hurons, or so the Ents call them in short language. Treebeard won't say much about them, but I think they are Ents that have become almost like trees, or at least to look at. They stand here and there in the woods or under the eaves, silent, watching endlessly over the trees, but deep in the darkest dales there are hundreds and hundreds of them, I believe. There is a great power in them, and they seem able to wrap themselves in shadow. It is difficult to see them moving, but they do. They can move very quickly if they are angry. You stand still looking at the weather, maybe, or listening to the rustling of the wind, and then suddenly you find that you are in the middle of a wood that with great groping trees all around you. They still have voices and can speak with the Ents. That is why they are called Hurons, Treebeard says, but they have become queer and wild, dangerous. I should be terrified of meeting them if there were no true Ents about to look after them. Well, in the very early night we crept down a long ravine into the upper end of the Wizard's Vale, the Ents with all their rustling Hurons behind. We could not see them, of course, but the whole air was full of creaking. It was very dark, a cloudy night. They moved at a great speed as soon as they had left the hills, and made a noise like a rushing wind. The moon did not appear through the clouds, and not long after midnight there was a tall wood all round the north side of Isengard. There was no sign of enemies, nor of any challenge. There was a light gleaming from the high window in the tower. That was all. Treebeard and a few more Ents crept in, right round to within sight of the great gates. Pippin and I were with him. We were sitting on Treebeard's shoulders, and I could feel the quivering tenseness in him. But even when they are roused, Ents can be very cautious and patient. They stood still as carved stones, breathing and listening. Then, all at once, there was a tremendous stir. Trumpets blared, and the walls of Isengard echoed. We thought that we had been discovered, and that battle was going to begin. But nothing of the sort. All Saruman's people were marching away. I don't know much about this war, or about the horsemen of Rohan, but Saruman seems to have meant to finish off the king and all his men with one final blow. He emptied Isengard. I saw the enemy go, endless lines of marching orcs, and troops of them mounted on great wolves, and there were battalions of men, too. Many of them carried torches, and in the flare I could see their faces. Most of them were ordinary men, rather tall and dark-haired, and grim, but not particularly evil-looking. But there were some others that were horrible, man-high, but with goblin faces, sallow, leering, squint-eyed. Do you know, they reminded me at once of Southerner at Bree. of that southerner at Bree, only he was not so obviously orc-like as most of these were. I thought of him too, said Aragorn. We had many of these half-orcs to deal with at Helm's Deep. It seems plain now that southerner was a spy of Saruman's, but whether he was working with the Black Riders or for Saruman alone, I do not know. It is difficult with these evil folk to know when they are in league and when they are cheating one another. Well, of all sorts together, there must have been 10,000 at the very least, said Mary. They took an hour to pass out of the gates. Some went off down the highway to the fords, and some turned away and went eastward. A bridge has been built down there, about a mile away, where the river runs in a very deep channel. You could see it now if you stood up. They were all singing with harsh voices and laughing, making a hideous din. I thought things looked very black for Rohan, but Treebeard did not move. He said, My business is with Isengard tonight, with rock and stone. But though I could not see what was happening in the dark, I believe the Hurons began to move south as soon as the gates were shut again. Their business was with orcs, I think. They were far down the valley in the morning, or at any rate there was a shadow there that one couldn't see through. As soon as Saruman had sent off all his army, our turn came. Treebeard put us down and went up to the gates and began hammering on the doors and calling for Saruman. There was no answer, except arrows and stones from the walls. But arrows are no use against Ents. They hurt them, of course, and infuriate them like stinging flies. But an Ent can be stuck as full of orc arrows as a pincushion, and take no serious harm. They cannot be poisoned, for one thing, and their skin seems to be very thick, and tougher than bark. It takes a very heavy axe stroke to wound them seriously. They don't like axes, but there would have to be a great many axemen to one Ent. A man that hacks once at an Ent never gets chance of a second blow. A punch from an Ent fist crumples up iron like thin tin. When Treebeard had got a few arrows in him, he began to warm up, to get positively hasty, as he would say. He let out a great hum, and a dozen more Ents came striding up. An angry Ent is terrifying. Their fingers and their toes just freeze on to rock, and they tear it up like bread crust. It was like watching the work of great tree roots in 100 years, all packed into a few moments. They pushed, pulled, tore, shook, and hammered, and clang, bang, crash, crack in 5 minutes. They had these huge gates just lying in ruin, and some were already beginning to eat into the walls, like rabbits in a sand pit. I don't know what Saruman thought was happening, but anyway, he did not know how to deal with it. His wizardry may have been falling off lately, of course, but anyway, I think he has not much grit, not much plain courage alone in a tight place without a lot of slaves and machines and things, if you know what I mean. Very different from old Gandalf. I wonder if his fame was not all along mainly due to his cleverness in settling at Isengard. No, said Aragorn. Once he was as great as his fame made him. His knowledge was deep. This pause brought to you by JJ. Attacked my camera. I think once he was as great as his fame made him. His knowledge was deep, his thought was subtle, and his hands marvelously skilled, and he had a power over the minds of others. The wise he could persuade, and the smaller folk he could daunt. That power he certainly still keeps. There are not many in Middle-earth that I should say were safe. If they were left alone to talk with him, even now, when he has suffered a defeat. Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel, perhaps, now that his wickedness has been laid bare, but very few others. "The Ents are safe," said Pippin. He seems at one time to have got round them, but never again. And anyway, he did not understand them, and he made his great mistake of leaving them out of his calculations. He had no plan for them, and there the few remaining rats of Isengard started bolting through every hole that the Ents made. The Ents let the men go after they had questioned them, 2 or 3 dozen only down at this end. I don't think many orc folk of any size escaped, not from the Hurons. There was a wood full of them all round Isengard by that time, as well as those that had gone down the valley. When the Ents had reduced a large part of the southern walls to rubbish, and what was left of his people had bolted and deserted him, Saruman fled in a panic. He seems to have been at the gates when we arrived. I expect he came to watch the splendid army march out. When the Ents broke their way in, he left in a hurry. They did not spot him at first, but the night had opened out, and there was a great light of stars, quite enough for Ents to see by, and suddenly Quickbeam gave a cry, "The Tree Killer! The Tree Killer!" Quickbeam is a gentle creature, but he hates Saruman all the more fiercely for that. His people suffered cruelly from orc axes. He leapt down the path from the inner gate, and he can move like a wind when he is roused. There was a pale figure hurrying away in and out of the shadows of the pillars, and it had nearly reached the stairs to the tower door, but it was a near thing. Quickbeam was so hot after him that he was within a step or two of being caught and strangled when he slipped in through the door. When Saruman was safe back in Orthanc, it was not long before he set some of his precious machinery to work. By that time there were many Ents inside Isengard. Some had followed Quickbeam, and others had burst in from the north and east. They were roaming about and doing a great deal of damage. Suddenly up came fires and foul fumes. The vents and shafts all over the plain began to spout and belch. Several of the Ents got scorched and blistered. One of them, Beachbone, I think he was called, a very tall, handsome Ent, got caught in a spray of some liquid fire and burned like a torch, a horrible sight. That sent them mad. I thought that they had really been roused before, but I was wrong. I saw what it was like at last. It was staggering. They roared and boomed and trumpeted until stones began to crack and fall at the mere noise of them. Mary and I lay on the ground and stuffed our cloaks into our ears. Round and round the rock of Orthanc the Ents were striding and storming like a howling gale, breaking pillars, hurling avalanches of boulders down the shafts, tossing up huge slabs of stone into the air like leaves. The tower was in the middle of a spinning whirlwind. I saw iron posts and blocks of masonry go rocketing up hundreds of feet and smash against the windows of Orthanc, but Treebeard kept his head. He had not had any burns, luckily. He did not want his folk to hurt themselves in their fury, and he did not want Saruman to escape out of some hole in the confusion. Many of the Ents were hurling themselves against the Orthanc rock, but that defeated them. It is very smooth and hard. Some wizardry is in it, perhaps older and stronger than Saruman's. Anyway, they could not get a grip on it or make a crack in it, and they were bruising and wounding themselves against it. So Treebeard went out into the ring and shouted. His enormous voice rose above all the din. There was a dead silence suddenly. In it we heard a shrill laugh from a high window in the tower. That had a queer effect on the Ents. They had been boiling over. Now they became cold, grim as ice, and quiet. They left the plain and gathered round Treebeard, standing quite still. He spoke to them for a little in their own language. I think he was telling them of a plan he had made in his old head long before. Then they just faded silently away in the grey light. Day was dawning by that time. They set a watch on the tower, I believe, but the watchers were so well hidden in shadows and kept so still that I could not see them. The others went away north. All that day they were busy, out of sight. Most of the time we were left alone. It was a dreary day, and we wandered about a bit, though we kept out of the view of the windows of Orthonk as much as we could. They stared at us so threateningly. A good deal of the time we spent looking for something to eat, and also we sat and talked, wondering what was happening away south in Rohan, and what had become of all the rest of our company. Every now and then we could hear in the distance the rattle and fall of stone and thudding noises echoing in the hills. In the afternoon we walked around the circle and went to have a look at what was going on. There was a great shadowy wood of Hurons at the head of the valley, and another round the northern wall. We did not dare to go in, but there was a rending, tearing noise of work going on inside. Ents and Hurons were digging great pits and trenches, and making great pools and dams, gathering all the water of the Isen and every other spring and stream that they could find. We left them to it. At dusk, Treebeard came back to the gate. He was humming and booming to himself and seemed pleased. He stood and stretched his great arms and legs and breathed deep. I asked him if he was tired. Tired? He said. Tired? Well, no, not tired, but stiff. I need a good draught of Entwash. We have worked hard. We have done more stone cracking and earth gnawing today than we have done in many a long year before. But it is nearly finished. When night falls, do not linger near this gate or in the old tunnel. Water may come through, and it will be foul water for a while, until all the filth of Saruman is washed away. Then Isen can run clean again. He began to pull down a bit more of the walls in a leisurely sort of way, just to amuse himself. We were just wondering where it would be safe to lie and get some sleep when the most amazing thing of all happened. There was the sound of a rider coming swiftly up the road. Mary and I lay quiet, and Treebeard hid himself in the shadows under the arch. Suddenly a great horse came striding up like a flash of silver. It was already dark, but I could see the rider's face clearly. It seemed to shine, and all his clothes were white. I just sat up, staring with my mouth open. I tried to call out, and couldn't. There was no need. He halted just by us and looked down at us. Gandalf, I said at last, but my voice was only a whisper. Did he say, Hello, Pippin? This is a pleasant surprise. No, indeed. He said, Get up, you tomfool of a took! Where in the name of wonder in all this ruin is Treebeard? I want him, quick! Treebeard heard his voice and came out of the shadows at once, and there was a strange meeting. I was surprised because neither of them seemed surprised at all. Gandalf obviously expected to find Treebeard here, and Treebeard might almost have been loitering about near the gates on purpose to meet him. Yet we had told the old Ent all about Moria, but then I remembered a queer look he gave us at the time. I can only suppose that he had seen Gandalf, or had some news of him, but would not say anything in a hurry. Don't be hasty is his motto, but nobody, not even the elves, will say much about Gandalf's movements when he is not there. Gandalf, said Treebeard, I am glad you have come. Wood and water, stock and stone, I can master, but there is a wizard to manage here. Treebeard, said Gandalf, I need your help. You have done much, but I need more. I have about 10,000 orcs to manage. Then those two went off, and they had a council together in some corner. It must have seemed very hasty to Treebeard, for Gandalf was in a tremendous hurry, and was already talking at a great pace before they passed out of hearing. They were only away a matter of minutes, perhaps a quarter of an hour. Then Gandalf came back to us, and he seemed relieved, almost merry. But then Mary was beside me. Oh, never mind. He did say he was glad to see us then. But Gandalf, I cried, where have you been? And have you seen the others? Where have I been? I am back, he answered in the genuine Gandalf manner. Yes, I have seen some of the others, but news must wait. This is a perilous night, and I must ride fast, but the dawn may be brighter, and if so, we shall meet again. Take care of yourselves, and keep away from Orthanc. Goodbye. Treebeard was very thoughtful after Gandalf had gone. He had evidently learnt a lot in a short time, and was digesting it. He looked at us and said, well, I find you are not such a hasty folk as I thought. You said much less than you might, and no more than you should. This is a bundle of news, and no mistake. Well, now, Treebeard must get busy again. Before he went, we got a little news out of him, and it did not cheer us up at all. But for a moment we thought more about you three than about Frodo and Sam, or about poor Boromir, for we gathered that there was a great battle going on, or soon would be, and that you were in it, and might never come out of it. Hurons will help, said Treebeard. Then he went away, and we did not see him again until this morning. It was deep night. We lay on top of a pile of stone and could see nothing beyond it. Mist or shadow blotted out everything like a great blanket all around us. The air seemed hot and heavy, and it was full of rustlings, creakings, and a murmur like voices passing. I think that hundreds more of the Hurons must have been passing by to help us in the battle. Later there was a great rumble of thunder away south, and flashes of lightning far away across Rohan. Every now and then we could see mountain peaks miles and miles away stab out suddenly, black and white, and then vanish. And behind us there were noises like thunder in hills, but different. At times the whole valley echoed. It must have been about midnight when the Ents broke the dams and poured all the gathered waters through a gap in the northern wall down into Isengard. The Huron dark had passed, and the thunder had rolled away. The moon was sinking behind the western mountains. Isengard began to fill up with black, creeping streams and pools. They glittered in the last light of the moon, and they spread over the plain. Every now and then the waters found their way down into some shaft or spout hole. Great white streams hissed up. Smoke rose in billows. There were explosions and gusts of fire. One great coil of vapor went whirling up, twisting round and round Orthanc until it looked like a tall peak of cloud, fiery underneath and moonlit above, and still more water poured in until at last Isengard looked like a huge flat saucepan, all streaming and bubbling. We saw a great cloud of smoke and steam from the south last night, when we came in the mouth of Non-Curanir, said Aragorn. We feared that Saruman was brewing some new devilry for us. Not he, said Pippin. He was probably choking and not laughing any more. By the morning, yesterday morning, the water had sunk down into all the holes, and there was a dense fog. We took refuge in that guard-room over there, and we had rather a fright. The lake began to overflow and pour out through the old tunnel, and the water was rapidly rising up the steps. We thought we were going to get caught like orcs in a hole, but we found a winding stair at the back of the storeroom that brought us out on top of the arch. It was a squeeze to get out, as the passages had been cracked and half blocked with fallen stone near the top. There we sat high up above the floods and watched the drowning of Isengard. The Ents kept on pouring in more water till all the fires were quenched and every cave filled. The fog slowly gathered together and steamed up into a huge umbrella of cloud. It must have been a mile high. In the evening there was a great rainbow over the eastern hills, and then the sunset was blotted out by a thick drizzle on the mountain sides. It all went very quiet. A few wolves howled mournfully far away. The Ents stopped the inflow in the night and sent the Isen back into its old course, and that was the end of it all. Since then, the water has been sinking again. There must be outlets somewhere from the caves underneath, I think. If Saruman peeps out of any of his windows, it must look an untidy, dreary mess. We felt very lonely, not even a visible Ent to talk to in all the rain, and no news. We spent the night up on top there above the arch, and it was cold and damp, and we did not sleep. We had a feeling that anything might happen at any minute. Saruman is still in his tower. There was a noise in the night, like a wind coming up the valley. I think Ents and Hurons that had been away came back then, but where they had all gone to now, I don't know. It was a misty, moisty morning when we climbed down and looked around again, and nobody was about. And that was about all there is to tell. It seems almost peaceful now after all this turmoil, and safer too somehow since Gandalf came back. I could sleep. They all fell silent for a while. Gimli refilled his pipe. "There is one thing I wonder about," he said, as he lit it with the flint and tinder. "Wormtongue. You told Theoden he was with Saruman. How did he get there?" "Oh, yes, I forgot about him," said Pippin. "He did not get here till this morning. We had just lit the fire and had some breakfast when Treebeard appeared again. We heard him humming and calling out our names outside. 'I have just come round to see how you are faring, my lads,' he said, 'and to give you some news. Hurons have come back. All's well. Aye, very well indeed,' he laughed and slapped his thighs. 'No more orcs in Isengard, no more axes, and there will be folk coming up from the south before the day is old, some that you may be glad to see.' He had hardly said that when we heard the sound of hoofs on the road. We rushed out before the gates, and I stood and stared, half expecting to see Strider and Gandalf coming riding up at the head of an army. But out of the mist there rode a man on an old tired horse, and he looked a queer twisted sort of creature himself. There was no one else. When he came out of the mist and suddenly saw all the ruin and wreckage in front of him, he sat and gaped, and his face went almost green. He was so bewildered that he did not seem to notice us at first. When he did, he gave a cry and tried to turn his horse round and ride off. But Treebeard took 3 strides, put out a long arm, and lifted him out of his saddle. His horse bolted in terror, and he grovelled on the ground. He said he was Grima, friend and counselor of the king, and had been sent with important message from Theoden to Saruman. No one else would dare to ride through the open land so full of foul orcs, he said, so I was sent, and I have had a perilous journey, and I am hungry and weary. I fled far north out of my way, pursued by wolves. I caught the sidelong looks he gave to Treebeard, and I said to myself, liar! Treebeard looked at him in his long, slow way for several minutes, till the wretched man was squirming on the floor. Then at last he said, "Oh, I was expecting you, Master Wormtongue." The man started at that name. "Gandalf got here first, so I know as much about you as I need, and I know what to do with you. Put all the rats in one trap," said Gandalf, "and I will. I am the master of Isengard now, but Saruman is locked in his tower, and you can go there and give him all the messages that you can think of." Let me go, said Wormtongue. "I know the way." "You knew the way, I don't doubt," said Treebeard, "but things have changed here a little. Go and see." He let Wormtongue go, and he limped off through the arch, and with us close behind, until he came inside the ring, and could see all the floods that lay between him and Orthanc. Then he turned to us. "Let me go away," he whined. "Let me go away. My messages are useless now." "They are indeed," said Treebeard, "but you have only two choices, to stay with me until Gandalf and your master arrive, or to cross the water. Which will you have?" The man shivered at the mention of his master, and put a foot into the water, but drew back. "I cannot swim," he said. "The water is not deep," said Treebeard. "It is dirty, but that will not harm you, Master Wormtongue. In you go now." With that the wretch floundered off into the flood. It rose up nearly to his neck before he got too far away for me to see him. The last I saw of him, he was clinging to some old barrel or piece of wood, but Treebeard waded after him and watched his progress. "Well, he has gone in," he said when he returned. "I saw him crawling up the steps like a draggled rat. There is someone in the tower still. A hand came out and pulled him in, so there he is, and I hope the welcome is to his liking. Now I must go and wash myself clean of the slime. I'll be away up on the north side if anyone wants to see me. There is no clean water down here fit for an Ent to drink or to bathe in, so I will ask you two lads to keep a watch at the gate for the folk that are coming. There'll be the Lord of the Fields of Rohan, mark you. You must welcome him as well as you know how. His men have fought a great fight with the orcs. Maybe you know the right fashion of men's words for such a lord better than Ents. There have been many lords in the green field in my time, and I have never learned their speech or their names. They will be wanting man food, and you know all about that, I guess. So find what you think is fit for a king to eat, if you can." And that is the end of the story, though I should like to know who this Wormtongue is. Was he really the king's counselor? "He was," said Aragorn, "and also Saruman's spy and servant in Rohan. Fate has not been kinder to him than he deserves. The sight of the ruin of all that he thought so strong and magnificent must have been almost punishment enough, but I fear that worse awaits him." "Yes, I don't suppose Treebeard sent him to Orthanc out of kindness," said Merry. "He seemed rather grimly delighted with the business, and was laughing to himself when he went to get his bathe and drink. We spent a busy time after that, searching the Flotsam and rummaging about. We found 2 or 3 storerooms in different places nearby, above the flood level, but Treebeard sent some Ents down, and they carried off a great deal of the stuff. "We want man food for 25, the Ents said, so you can see that somebody had counted your company carefully before you arrived. You 3 were evidently meant to go with the great people, but you would not have fared any better. We kept as good as we sent, I suppose, better because we sent no drink." "What about drink?" I said to the Ents. "There is water of Isen," they said, "and that is good enough for Ents and men, but I hope that the Ents may have found time to brew some of their draughts from the mountain springs, and we shall see Gandalf's beard curling when he returns." After the Ents had gone, we felt tired and hungry, but we did not grumble. Our labors had been well rewarded. It was through our search for man food that Pippin discovered the prize of all the Flotsam, those hornblower barrels. "Pipeweed is better after food," said Pippin. "That is how the situation arose." "We understand it all perfectly well," said Gimli. "All except one thing," said Aragorn. "Leaf from the South Farthing and Isengard. The more I consider it, the more curious I find it. I have never been in Isengard, but I have journeyed in this land, and I know well the empty countries that lie between Rohan and the Shire. Neither goods nor folk have passed that way for many a long year, not openly. Saruman had secret dealings with someone in the Shire, I guess. Wormtongues may be found in other houses than King Theoden's. Was there a date on the barrels?" "Oh, yes," said Pippin. "It was the 1417 crop. That is last year's, no, the year before, of course now, a good year." "Ah, well, whatever evil was afoot is over now, I hope. Or Else it is beyond our reach at present, said Aragorn. Yet I think I shall mention it to Gandalf, small matter though it may seem among his great affairs. I wonder what he is doing, said Merry. The afternoon is getting on. Let us go and look around. You can enter Isengard now, at any rate. Strider, if you want to, but it is not a very cheerful sight. And here is a picture of the Tower of Isengard, which looks strangely like the movie poster, actually. Because it's drawn by the same person.
It does.
It does, right? Okay. So, that is the end of this chapter. Chapter 10 is tomorrow. It is called The Voice of Saruman. And we shall read that one.
I know what it sounds like.
Actually, I take it back. We might not read it tomorrow. Because I've got my run
I know
to
what
do.
it sounds like. This is what he sounds like.
So,
Let
I-
me give you.
more to follow on whether or not we read it tomorrow. It's going to depend on how I'm feeling, because I'm not getting very much sleep tonight, and probably not very much sleep tomorrow night either, because I'm doing the movements during Ben's Crucible. So that is what is going on in our family. Ben is in San Diego, and he is doing the Crucible this week, and it starts tomorrow at 2 o'clock California time. And I think Kimberly wants to show everybody her fingernails.
No, never mind.
You can show off your fingernails. It's
Can I show
okay.
off my fingernails?
Oh, Wanda.
It took me a very long time, but I did it. And they're shiny purple and pink.
Yay! Okay, so JJ did his too, and they're clear.
Yeah,
Okay,
there's
so
a little bit of sparkles.
I hope that you have a great night, and more to follow on what we do this week. And God